Danger. Once you get into the desert, there's no going back, said the camel driver. And when you can't go back, you have to worry only about the best way of moving forward. The rest is up to Allah, including the danger.
Good afternoon, young kings. Time for your more motivation. Jumping on today, something been placed on my heart to do. If you read the title already, you've seen that we're about to examine the U in Ukraine, the U being YOU. We're going to examine some of the parallels from what's happening now in this world to what's happening as we try to reform our realities and attain or ascend to our higher version of ourselves. The Most High is the most efficient manager or being there is, if it is not an insult to call it the Most High a being. But everything, there's no time wasted. I think there's kingdom principles and parallels that we can benefit from some of the things that's happening in this world. But before we get into that, I'm going to jump into just some train of thoughts that have flowed through my head in between videos. And I'm going to continue to try to write these things down and be a better steward of my thoughts just to share with you. Some of them are original thoughts and some of them are coming out of a byproduct of having a conversation or reading something or just something that has encountered or came across my consciousness. So on the 24th, after I got off the video, I said, today begins the rest of your life. Live well. Yesterday is no longer available to be altered. Tomorrow is too far away to touch. Enjoy today. Live in the moment. And then later that day, I wrote kind of a affirmation to myself, calling myself topsoil and saying, wherever I am, everyone grows. Like there's no option. And if you hear me repeating things like they have to grow or go, that is a model. Like there's no one allowed to be just stagnant in my life anymore. There's no dead weight. There's no people that's just along for the ride, for a scenic route or whatever it may be. I am moving in a direction and it's different than what I have traveled before. Now I'm going to stand on the shoulders of things that I've done and accomplishments I have, but they're not going to define me, but I'm just going to pick up from there and go to a higher version of myself. So on the 25th, I wrote just a thought about thinking. It says, think for yourself, use your own mind to enhance your life. Allowing others to think for you makes you a prisoner to the thoughts and opinions of others. So just use your head, make your own decision. Even if something I say in this video don't sound right, it's your responsibility to go through and search it out fully to see if you can confirm or deny what I just said. The next one was manage yourself so no one else has to or can. Like be a good steward of your own resources, your time, your energy, your intellect, your physical, everything that has to do with you. Be a good steward over, manage it so no one else has to manage it or try to manage it. On the 26th, I wrote down train of thought, never partner with or depend on people who have hidden agendas. You say, if they have hidden agendas, how am I going to know? You'll see, it will come out. People can't hide for long, but never partner with people who have hidden agendas. Later on that day, I wrote, everyone who helps you is not for you, just as everyone who hurts you is not against you. Life is filled with confusing/complicated injuries, casualties, as well as prosperity. Like everything that's good to you is not good for you, and everything that's bad to you is not bad for you. So there's a mix. Sometimes you got to chew the meat and spit out the bone. Next one, what you do in your time of need will also determine how much you bleed when it's time to be freed. Like when you very desperate, there's a saying out there say, if you want something bad, that's exactly how you're going to get it bad. So what you do in your time of need would also determine how much you bleed when it's time to be freed. And a lot of times people want to give you an ounce of help for a pound of debt. So the scales are not balanced. The next one, some people will invade your kingdom in order to make you pawns in theirs. So never be a pawn in somebody else's scheme. Some people will invade you in your privacy, your peace, in order for you to be a chess piece in their game of that they're playing. The next thought I wrote down, what is happening to you is bigger than you. Respond righteously to minimize the impact of the crisis. Like everything that happens to you is not just an attack on you. There's other implications for people around you. So it's bigger than you. So you got to respond righteously, and then that will allow you to minimize the impact of the crisis. Not eliminate it, but you can minimize it. And then the next thought was, just because what is happening does not affect you, byproduct of it happening will impact you. Like there's things that's happening around you that you will be impacted by you. And talking with a friend, Eric, he gave me this quote. It's a Japanese saying: it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So just having a mindset of a warrior king. So it's better for you to be a warrior and be placed in a gardener, be placed in a garden, than it would be for you to be a gardener and be placed in conflict or chaos or war. So just keep that in mind. And then I read an article on there. It says, I'd rather be, and the author was Richard Matthews. He says, I'd rather be a skilled warrior attempting to enjoy the beauties of a garden rather than a gardener trying to understand the chaos of a battle. And I'll read that again because I've been stumbling on that. I'd rather be a skilled warrior attempting to enjoy the beauty of a garden rather than a gardener trying to understand the chaos of war. Just have your warrior mindset. The next thought was, war is common and at time needed to restore the illusion of peace. Just an original thought that I had, like there's an illusion of peace. And I wrote a subnote: of the last 3,400 years, the world has only been at peace 268 of them, meaning like 8% of the last 3,400 years, there has been peace. The rest of the remaining of the 92% of the time, this world has been in conflict, meaning like there's this human endeavor is a destructive endeavor. Like we are instruments of destruction. We find out how to destroy things and tear things up. So with that being said, I'm going to examine some of the you in Ukraine and pull out some parallel understandings for our growth and development as we go along. There's going to be some readings, so you'll see me look at the screen. Be patient with me. We're just coming up on 7 minutes. And to be honest with you, I got like 7 to 8 pages of notes. So some of them I'm just going to glance over, and others I may park there, and I may have to come back and do another video. Understanding this, I'm not a history teacher. I barely graduated high school. So I put that out there from the outset. So check the facts. I did check them, but go and double check them. And there's some additional ad-libs that are not in my notes that I will continue to do as I go through this. My understanding of this is at the infancy stages and growing. I will say this: when the conflict started to kick off about a year or so ago, and they was moving troops to the border, they being Russia, moving troops to the border, they had a CSSB that was mobilizing, deploying over to Poland. And I interviewed for the battalion commander job to go over to Poland to kind of observe the Russian activity as they were moving closer to the border of Ukraine, and Poland shares a border with Ukraine. Unfortunately, I didn't get the assignment. They selected another talented officer. There's no indictment on that individual or indictment on my skill set. That was the individual they selected to go. So I didn't get a chance to go over to Poland. I was later subsequently placed in another battalion commander slot. And the most I decided who goes where. So it wasn't man that decided that. The most I decided was more beneficial and practical for me to be where I am at this point in time than it was for me to be deployed over there. That unit has since returned, and upon the return, the tensions and stuff has kicked up. So we'll go through the brief history of it real quick. Like I said, I'll be doing some reading and some ad-libs, so hopefully you get something out of it. And let's just go. So when you talk about Ukraine, the word Ukraine itself, the word means borderlands. And that's when you talk about how we've been establishing our reality and establishing our kingdom. You got to establish that your boundaries and your borders, the people that surround you, making sure that you are safe and secure and that you're able to operate in your sovereign land. So the word Ukraine itself means borderland. And for us to build our borders, and that comes with protection and things of that nature. So the word itself gives you an indication of what they're struggling with in this new environment. I won't even call it a new environment because I just told you the world's been at war a long time and there's a lot of stuff going on. So protecting our borders. So back in 1991, so over 3 decades ago, this stuff has happened. And quick ad-lib, like things that happened in your past, people will not forget. And they will want to return to the days that of your former self and then imprison you to that. So that's just a nugget. So in 1991, Ukraine declares its independence on August 24th. And that's still celebrated to this day as their Independence Day. As in the U.S., we celebrate the 4th of July as their Independence Day. And if you're of the melanated descent, you know, you can go back to Juneteenth and stuff of that nature, and it goes back into June. But in 91, Ukraine declares their independence, and it's still celebrated to this day. But in their declaring independence, they started to waver between Moscow and Russia and then the West. You know, they were wavering back and forth of like, okay, some things they favored the West and NATO for, and other things they favored their former oppressor, Russia, for. So they were going back and forth. And as I was reading that, I recognized that for those who are in the States, that's kind of like the squirrel analogy. And I'll give you a squirrel analogy. If you're driving, especially up around Michigan, during the part of the season, you'll see a lot of dead squirrels on the road. And the reason that there are a lot of squirrels that die on the road because of indecision. A squirrel is meant to be dwelling in trees and running in, but every now and then it comes to a point where they need to cross a road. And it's not that they're not fast enough to cross the road. They have enough speed and they're agile enough to get across. But a lot of times they'll start to cross the road, and in the middle, they'll change their mind and turn around and go back. And when they turn around and go back, they'll end up meeting their catastrophic end because they get hit by a car or something. But if they had to just continue on across, they could have navigated that obstacle a lot more efficiently than it would be going back and forth. So that's what is happening here in with the Ukraine and Russia, meaning that they declared their independence, but then they're playing both sides of the fence. They say they want to be an independent nation and they want to join NATO and be a part of that, but then they're taking money for Russia and stuff of that nature. So we'll continue on. In 1992, right after a year after they declared their independence, NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and there's about 30 countries in there. Just a brief synopsis on NATO. NATO is a collection of countries, approximately 30 countries. Some of them are small in size and have the inability to protect themselves against people foreign and, you know, that's outside their country from invading them. So what they do, they join NATO, and it's kind of like joining a group of protection. You sign up for their version of ADT, their securities alarm thing. So if you're a part of NATO and then someone invades you, then a collection of those 30 countries will come to your aid to assist you with navigating through the conflict, the war, whatever it is that adversary is trying to do. So in 1992, NATO started to contemplate letting Ukraine into NATO, and they go back and forth. And Ukraine formally established a relationship with the alliance, though it does not join. So they're kind of on the fence. They kind of say, we want to be over there, we want your protection, but we still don't really quite want to join. But then you got to realize, like in Ukraine, that is a country divided. And I say it's a country divided because it's been at war for a while, and there's different mindsets at different places and parts of the country. Meaning in the West, West Ukraine, people want freedom. They enjoy their independence and they just want to be free and independent sovereign nation. And they oppose some of the ideology of Russia and stuff of that nature. But over in the East, the people in their mindset towards Russia is a little more friendly, meaning like they look at Russia as a big brother, and they look at it as, you know, they still can kind of have allies with Russia and stuff of that nature. So the people over the East, and you got to recognize the East side is the side that borders Russia. So in the East side is also the side that subsequently was invaded. So they invaded to a town that was a little more friendly to the opposition. So they didn't see Russia as the enemy or anything of that nature. And everybody can make up their mind if Russia is their enemy or not. I'm just giving you the information. So they attempt to sign, but they don't sign. They have the squirrel effect, and they have to live some of the results of that. We went over NATO. In 1994, the Soviet Union collapsed. So the Soviet Union used to be a collection of all these other countries as well. But now with the collapse of the Soviet Union, these countries are seeking their independence and becoming a sovereign nation. And Ukraine was the third largest country. meaning like Russia is obviously a little larger, but when they divided and Ukraine declared their independence, Ukraine inherited by product of geographic location. They inherited the third largest nuclear missiles, intercontinental missiles, so they can push a button here and hit you over there. And they had the third largest in the world. But we've been trying to disarm and have people not be a part of NATO. So, not be a part of the nuclear destruction of this thing we call Earth and planet. So they joined a treaty. And in this treaty, there was the US, the UK, and Russia. And they agreed to surrender all their nuclear heads that were intercontinental, with the understanding that those countries and others will respect their independence and their sovereign nation to remain the existing borders of Ukraine. So in 1994, they say, hey, we want to be independent, but we want your guarantee that if we surrender these missiles, that you are going to respect our boundaries and allow us to operate as an independent nation. NATO agreed to the treaties with opposition, especially, let me get ahead. NATO didn't agree to that, but there was these three countries, US, UK, and Russia. And I got a point in here for NATO, meaning like for you, a kingdom lesson is like never get into treaties with the opposition. NATO, never agree to treaties with the opposition, especially at the detriment of your own sovereignty. Like if you losing something that's going to expose you to danger to someone else, then you really need to revisit if that's the wisest thing for you to do. Continuing along as we're getting up on time, 1994 to 2004, in 10 years, their president helped transition the Ukraine from a Soviet republic, capitalist society, and then they started privatizing business and working on improvement of international and economic opportunities. But it was kind of cut short because they had some scandals in the administration between 94 and 2004, which some of the senior leadership in the country were accused of death with someone that was applying for office. And you can look more into that. We're going to continue on. In 2004, it's time for elections, for them to elect the leader that's going to take them forward beyond some of the success they have observed in their recent independence. So in 2004, you got the incumbent party. They're experiencing growth and they're experiencing the benefits of being sovereign and stuff of that nature. And he's got his successor that he's putting up to replace him. And then you got another opponent that's Russia backed, a candidate that is support of Russia and stuff of that nature. And the long story short, the guy that was backed by Russia, and I'm not going to give names, one, because their names are hard to pronounce. And then for others, it's like, I told you, I barely graduated high school. I can't pronounce all those names. But anyways, a long story short, the president that was backed by Russia ended up becoming the new president. And you got to realize that before they're growing and they're gaining their sovereignty, and they're leaning more towards NATO than they are any other avenue. But once this new president comes in, they go back to NATO because the agreement to join NATO is still there. So in 2008, the president, there has two formal requests in January that Ukraine be granted membership action plan to NATO, the first step in the process to joining the alliance. So in 2008, it seems like they're continuing on to join NATO. And back then, I will say President Bush supported Ukraine membership to NATO, but France and Germany opposed it after Russia voices its displeasure. So Russia is saying, hey, it's okay for you not to continue to be a part of Russia, but we oppose you joining the West and being part of NATO, where you're influenced by the US and other countries that are surrounding us, because that's going to make a threat to us. So in 2009, after they do that, try to get their membership to NATO, in 2009, Russia, which is it has all this natural gas company, what they do as a response to the Ukraine trying to join NATO is that they cut off the gas line. Now, especially in the wintertime, NATO gets cold. Ukraine gets cold and they need gas to heat their homes and stuff of that nature. And you can start to see some of the parallels of the impacts that we have over in the US because we depended on that. So if you are paying more at the pump, that could be a direct reflection of what's going on there in Europe. So in 2009, Russia cuts off the natural gas that flows through Ukraine because they're the ones that supplied it. But not only does it flow to Ukraine, Eastern Europe was impacted because it continues to rely on pipelines through the Ukraine and receive gas and imports from Russia. So gas prices quickly rose and took an all-time high. So with that being stated, is that you have to understand, like, and I think in some of my research it stated, like, during this period of time, they start to go through this economic depression. They had lost like 1.5 billion in revenue during this time. In this hardship, people were freezing. They weren't able to heat their homes as efficiently as they were before. So they went through this crisis and now they got a decision to make. They still want their independence, but then they're being kind of attacked by not having the natural gas is being turned off to them. So then what happens now, you got this Russian-backed president. He decides to kind of pull away from NATO and he says he wants to remain neutral between Russia and the West. They just want to be neutral. But in that neutrality, what they also did is accept a $15 billion loan in response to them not signing to NATO. Now, I'm not calling it a bribe or anything of that nature. I'm just saying they made some decisions in their time of need. If you go back to the quote that says, what you do in the time of need will determine how much you bleed when it's time to be freed. This is what they did in their time of need. They went back and they got 15 billion. And now, you know, Russia is the guarantor of that money. And now they got their gas and stuff of that nature. So continuing on, and it talks about in Proverbs 26, as a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness. So if you were once in bondage to this country and you sought to get your freedom, although everybody in your country is not on board and you divided between the West and the East, it's not wisdom to go back and take money from the individual that imprisoned you, because now you're back into debt to them. So as the dog returns to his vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to end this video as part 1 since we're just over 22 minutes. And then I'll continue on to the second part as we go through the rest of these notes. Be well, young kings.